Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. It's time to have a look at the naval and helicopter stuff from the past developers. There's some big old ships to have a look at, and also a fun Apache. Let's get into it. The first vehicle is the USS Wyoming, the AG-17, specifically the 1945 variant. After the London Naval Treaty was signed in 1930, USS Wyoming's career as a super dreadnought battleship was ended, as she was to be decommissioned in accordance to the treaty. However, unlike the other dreadnoughts of her era, Wyoming's career would not end at a scrapyard, but rather continue as a training ship, underwent several modifications as a testbed, and will contribute to the US Navy in a different way, compared to her sister ship, the Arkansas, which continued to serve as a proper battleship. On January 1931, the Wyoming was placed under demilitarization conversion into a training ship. During this process, half of her 12-inch guns, the torpedo bulges, and the side armor covering her sponson positions were removed. After a conversion was completed in May, she received her new hull number, which was AG-17, under the Miscellaneous Auxiliary Ship category, which is just hilarious. During the 30s, up until Pearl Harbor, the Wyoming spent her career training midshipmen and cadets via a cruise across the Atlantic, often making goodwill visits to various European countries, including an amphibious assault training with the US Marines and a visit of the Admiral Grafspee at Kiel in Germany in 1937. After a refit in 1938 that saw the addition of her first set of 5-inch 38 guns on her starboard sides and removal of her stern sponson guns, Wyoming resumed duty as a training ship until the outbreak of the war in Europe the next year. She was assigned to the Atlantic Reserve Fleet along with the Battleship Texas, New York, and also the Arkansas, along with the aircraft carrier Ranger. In 1941, she underwent another refit to convert her into a gunnery training ship, removing the remaining sponson guns at the bridge and then receiving several AA guns of various caliber. As the United States entered the war in December 1941, Wyoming was assigned to the Atlantic Fleet's Operational Training Command and operated around Chesapeake Bay, which later gained her nickname the Chesapeake Raider. During the early stages of the war, the US Navy planned to convert the Wyoming back into her battleship configuration. This plan was later cancelled, however, as the Wyoming's capabilities to train thousands of anti-aircraft gunners to accommodate the expanding American fleet was proven very useful. Between the 12th of January to the 3rd of April 1944, Wyoming underwent reconstruction to convert her into a fully dedicated anti-air training ship. Her remaining 12-inch turrets were replaced with a twin 5-inch counterparts. She is also mounted in every model of fire control radar in use at the time, and this basically meant that units could train on all of the different weapon systems. As the war in Europe came to a close, the Wyoming received her final refit in April of 45 to serve as an experimental gunnery ship for what was later known as the Operational Development Force. There, she conducted gunnery training to develop tactics to counter Japanese kamikaze pilots and also being a testbed for new fire control systems. The Wyoming served in this role until 1946, with one of her last batch of crew being the future US President, Jimmy Carter. The Wyoming was decommissioned on the 11th of July 1947 at Norfolk. She would stay there until August to transfer her crew to the USS Mississippi, which was now the AG-128, passing her role as an experimental testbed before finally being scrapped on the 5th of December. Ending her 37-year career under the US flag and 16 years as a training ship. During these years, she trained over 35,000 gunners of 7 shipboard weapon systems, which is just crazy. She ended up with 14 5-inch dual-purpose guns in 4 dual turrets, 2 single enclosed turrets, and 4 open mounts, 4 3-inch AA guns in 4 single mounts, 10 40mm Bofors AA guns in 3 dual mounts and 1 quadruple, 12 20mm Oerlikon cannons, 4 single mounts, and then 4 dual mounts. For Germany, we have a Moltke-class battlecruiser, the SMS Goeben. The Goeben was the second ship of the battlecruiser class, itself the successor to the Von der Tann class, present already in War Thunder. She was ordered in early April 1909, laid down in late August 1909, and was launched 2 years later in late March of 1911, and commissioned in 1912. As the First World War, Goeben went out to attack French shipping, as well as doing shore bombardment on the shores of a French African colony, along with Breslau, who was bombarding a different part of the colony. This would not last long, and German naval command, against the Kaiser's own orders, gave the Goeben and Breslau order to sail to Constantinople in the Ottoman Empire, or modern-day Turkey. However, they first needed to refuel due to running low on coal, and went to Messina to refit their coal bunkers. On the way to Messina, the two ships would encounter the British battlecruisers, the HMS Indefatigable and the Indomitable. However, never opened fire, as the British had not made a war declaration yet, so instead passed each other with the two British battlecruisers, then turning around, following the Goeben, but failed to keep up, as they themselves needed engine maintenance. One thing that cannot be overstated during this encounter, that the Goeben was very lucky, as the declaration of war between Germany and the UK would occur hours after the battlecruisers had encountered each other. After reaching the port of Messina and restocking their coal, they would set sail for the Ottoman Empire. By this point, the declaration of war had occurred, and there was now a third British battlecruiser, the Inflexible, along with other British vessels now hunting the two German lone vessels, but made a mistake as they believed they would try to re-enter the Adriatic Sea when they were going to the Ottoman Empire. By the time the British vessels realized their real destination, at which point the German vessels were already halfway there, and as a result, the British ordered every ship in the area along with some French ones after the Goeben. Once the German ship arrived, negotiations would begin for the safe passage of the vessels, and by the time they were given clearance to pass through, it is said that the smoke from the British cruisers were visible over the horizon. As a result, in order for them to gain clearance, since the Ottoman Empire was not at war yet, decided to circumvent neutrality requirements by means of a fictitious sail. And before the Germans could convey their response on the Ottoman offer, the Ottomans had purchased the ships for 80 million marks on the 11th of August 1914, and would be ceremonially commissioned into the Ottoman Navy on the 16th of August. The German commander of the Goeben, Souchon, had to accept the offer to command the Turkish fleet. The ship would then be renamed, along with the Breslau, to Yavuz Sultan Selim, and the Breslau was renamed to the Midilli. They would still have German crews, and best of all, that is best worded as the Wikipedia states, their German crews donned Ottoman uniforms and fezzes. As the now Yavuz Sultan Selim, Goeben would begin operations against Imperial Russia on the 29th of October 1914. In the Black Sea, while once again the Ottoman Empire was not at war yet against Sevastopol in order to force the Ottomans to join the Germans in the war. She would receive a 10-inch round to her funnel that failed to detonate and would receive 2 more non-damaging hits. On her way back to friendly waters, she would encounter a Russian mine layers that would end up scuttling itself, with the escorting Russian destroyer taking damage from the Yavuz Sultan's secondary battery. Following this, on November the 1st, Russia would declare war on the Ottoman Empire as a result. In order to deal with the Yavuz Sultan, the Russians decided to consolidate the entire Black Sea fleet in order to prevent ships being picked off by the superior Ottoman ship, as they lacked, and basically had none, any dreadnoughts or battlecruisers available to challenge the Yavuz Sultan. As a result, the Yavuz, along with the Midilli, would engage the entire Russian Black Sea fleet, which consisted of 5 pre-dreadnoughts, 3 light cruisers, and 12 destroyers, as they were returning from another bombardment mission on the 18th of November in the Battle of Cape Sarch. This resulted in one of the Russian pre-dreadnoughts being damaged, with Yavuz Sultan also receiving some damage, in return on both sides withdrawing their forces. Following this, Yavuz Sultan would help escort troop transports as well as more shore bombardments until the 26th of December 1914. They hit a mine, followed causing a 540 square foot hole by a second mine, causing a 690 square foot hole, while off the coast of the Bosphorus. The issue with repairing the Yavuz Sultan was that there was no dry dock in the Ottoman Empire that could handle it. Therefore, in order to deal with the damage, it was put in a metal cofferdam in which they repaired the holes caused by the mine by filling them with concrete, which would only last about 7 years. Following this, in 1915, the still damaged Yavuz would sortie from Bosphorus in order to cover friendly cruisers from the Russian fleet on the 28th of January and the 7th of February. Following this, she would try to escort the friendly cruisers again, including the protected cruiser, the Mesidai, which struck a mine, resulting in the cancellation of another attempt at shore bombardment. Following this, the Yavuz Sultan and the very familiar Midilli would once again encounter some of the Russian Black Sea Fleet forces that failed to result in anything. On the 25th of April, which was the same day as the landings taking place at Gallipoli, Russian naval forces would bombard the fortifications located at Bosphorus. 2 days later, the Yavuz Sultan, along with 2 pre-dreadnoughts, would show up in the area to pass through the straits in order to deal with the landing in Gallipoli, and would shortly engage the HMS Queen Elizabeth, and then fall back behind cover since they stood no chance against the more modern 15-inch armed British super dreadnought. The Yavuz Sultan would then try it again 5 days later, but would be spotted by a British pre-dreadnought who got 5 shots on the Yavuz before it was gone again. Following this, the Yavuz Sultan on the 1st of May would be sent to go find the Russian naval forces bombarding the forts in Bosphorus, and went all the way up to Sevastopol only to find nothing. On the 10th of May, she would encounter 2 Russian pre-dreadnoughts, once again with the Yavuz Sultan, once again receiving little damage from the outdated Russian ships, and set course to Bosphorus, being pursued by light Russian forces. Following this, the Yavuz Sultan would have some of her 8.8cm guns removed, as well as 5.9-inch guns, and her familiar friend, the Midilli, struck a mine in mid-July, pulling it off escort duty, resulting in the Sultan being used for escorting. However, during this time, she would try to engage Russian destroyers who were harassing the Ottoman coal ships, what eventually saw her off convoy duty. By the end of the summer that year, the Russians would also finally complete something that actually could stand up to the Yavuz, with the dreadnought Imperatrica Maria and also the Imperatrica Ekaterina Velikaya, making its situation more difficult than it already was. As the situation got worse in 1916, the Yavuz Sultan would encounter the pre-dreadnought Imperatrica Ekaterina and tried to disengage. However, due to the constant use and lack of proper maintenance, the Yavuz Sultan had difficulty outrunning the better condition and still new Russian dreadnoughts. Following this, she would finally get some repairs to her propeller shaft and would mainly support the land campaign as the coal situation was getting worse. That resulted in the suspension of the vehicle and also the Midilli until the armistice between Russia and the Central Powers occurred, which allowed for the coal situation to improve. In 1918, the Yavuz Sultan, along with the Midilli, was sent out to divert British attention away from Palestine and would engage and sink 2 British monitors, and then was sent off to engage a British pre-dreadnought that was preparing to make steam, but on the way, the Midilli would strike 7 mines and sink, while the Yavuz Sultan would end up striking 3 of them and would breach herself, taking advantage of the moment British air service aircraft would attack the ship. And the Royal Navy would send a submarine to finish the Yavuz Sultan, only to find she has been towed away by an older German pre-dreadnought that in fact was sold to Turkey when they were not at war. And once again the Yavuz would be put on a cofferdam from early August to mid-October. Finally, after years serving as a part of the Ottoman Navy, Germany finally officially transferred ownership of the ship to the Ottomans, and was then to be transferred over to the British as a part of war reparations. She would have probably then suffered the same fate as the other German dreadnoughts that would be interned at Scapa Flow. However, the events swung in the Yavuz Sultan's favour as the Turkish Revolution had begun, and once the Turkish revolutionaries won, that they had discarded the entire treaty, keeping the Yavuz Sultan, they would then shorten her name to the Yavuz. The now Yavuz would, in 1920, be made as a centerpiece of the Turkish Navy as a part of an attempt to refurbish the poor Yavuz, and by refurbish, they would leave the ship at Izmit for 6 years, neglecting it even more than with only 2 boilers operational, unable to steer under her own steam, and still had damage that needed much repair from battle damage that was only temporarily fixed. But after 6 years being left to rot, Turkey would finally get a dry dock that could handle her. However, her condition was so bad that she was unable to handle rough seas. It would take another 3 years, from 1927 to 30, for the Yavuz to finally get the maintenance she so desperately needed and deserved, with a few accidents occurring that would delay the repair. However, work would speed up after the workers were motivated when the Greeks had a naval exercise off the Turkish coast. Once repaired, she had received a new boiler, or new boilers, that ended up driving her speed past the speed she ran on at the original sea trials, removed 2 of her 15cm guns, new French fire control systems. One thing, however, was not improved on her was her armor, even after the lesson of Jutland had been implemented in the other navies. As a response, the Soviets would transfer a dreadnought and also light cruiser to the Black Sea due to her being brought back into service. She would then take Turkish Prime Minister to Istanbul, as well as the Sea of Iran to Samsun in 1933, and would receive another refit in 1938. The Turkish Navy had planned to keep her in service until 1945, in which she would be replaced by a new battleship. However, the Second World War broke out, meaning no one would build a ship for Turkey. During the war, she would have her AA armament upgraded, with 4 new 8.8cm flat guns, 10 40mm and 4 20mm. However, she, like many other ships, during the Second World War, recognized that the need for strong AA armaments was needed, and the number of AA guns would increase to 22 40mm and 24 20mm. In 1946, the Yavuz would be at Istanbul when the USS Missouri and 2 destroyers visited in order to return the Turkish ambassador, and would get to exchange a 19-gun salute. Finally, after 48 around years of service in 1950, the Yavuz was decommissioned and would be stricken from the Naval Register in 1954. Before this, however, in 1952, as Turkey joined NATO, she would be given the hull number B-70 as a part of the NATO Reserve Fleet. The final part of this ship's life came in 1963, when the Turkish government offered West Germany the Yavuz to be returned to them as a museum ship, but quite sadly declined. She would be sold for scrapping in 1971, taken to the breakers yard in 1973, and 3 years later, the work on scrapping her would be complete, leaving the USS Texas as the only dreadnought-type ship to remain from the First World War, and the last true battlecruiser in the world. For Britain, we have a Tiger-class light cruiser, the HMS Blake from 1961. The Blake, as a member of the Tiger class, can trace her lineage all the way back to the Second World War. She was originally laid down in 1942 as a Minotaur or Swiftsure class cruiser, but these were a low priority for the Royal Navy, so she stayed in construction until 1945. Interestingly, she briefly changed names to Tiger before going back to Blake, and in 1945 her partially constructed hull was launched, but with the need for cruisers extremely diminished after the end of the war, and also the economic woes that ensued, she was almost immediately laid up again in 1946. It wouldn't be until 1954 that she resumed construction, but she was to be made out a new, more modern design. This, of course, would be the Tiger class. Blake and her sisters would be the victim of back-and-forth changing of design requirements and also budgetary woes. To make a long story short, they ended up as an anti-aircraft set of cruisers, relying on advanced fire control and powerful anti-aircraft cannons to hit their targets. This was predicated on the idea that guided ship-borne missiles for anti-aircraft use would take a long time to develop, which was actually completely untrue. Blake was commissioned on the 18th of March 1961 as the last cruiser to be commissioned in the Royal Navy. That same year, Sea Slug and also Sea Cat, two surface-to-air missile systems, would reach operational service. It was apparent almost immediately that Blake and her sisters had spent too long in the oven and would rapidly be outmodded, so the Royal Navy had to come up with a new use for them pretty quickly. Similar to the American Des Moines class Newport News, Blake would be refit to serve as a flagship of sorts, with enhanced command and control equipment as well as extra crew space. In terms of her combat capabilities, she was repurposed as an anti-submarine warfare platform, and to this end, her aft guns were removed and replaced with a helicopter hangar which housed the Westland Wessex and then later the Sea King helicopters. The forward guns were retained for surface bombardment and engaging light vessels, though this would never come to pass. The Blake would not see combat use, though she was hardly inactive. In 1969, she helped to test the capabilities of the prototype Harrier VTOL aircraft, as well as operating in the Mediterranean in 1969 near Malta. She would return in 1971 for the withdrawal from Malta and visited the US in the same year for British Day in San Francisco. Blake would also visit Key West at some point in 1978 as one of her final actions. The Blake and Tiger were expensive to maintain and of questionable utility, but they also filled the ASW niche for the Royal Navy for a good 15 years. On the 6th of December 1979, Blake, the last cruiser remaining in the Royal Navy, was paid off and decommissioned. As she let loose a ceremonial salvo in the English Channel, she would also become the last Royal Navy vessel to fire a 6-inch gun. The Blake and Tiger were laid up in 1980, and in 1981 were earmarked for disposal. It was apparently considered to recommission them for the Falklands conflict, but by the time they would have been ready to set sail, the war was already over, and she was scrapped soon after. Her ship's bell was the only element that was preserved. As a ship of the Tiger class, the Blake carried the same armament. She had 4 6-inch cannons in 2 twin gun mounts, notably for their automatic loaded system, allowing a rate of fire of 20 rounds per minute. While the Blake and the Tiger were sisters, the Blake did have one thing setting her apart. The Blake's 6-inch gun turrets were electrically traversed with the RP-53 remote power control, as opposed to the Tiger's hydraulic traverse using the RP-13 remote power control. This superior fire control system is claimed to have allowed Blake to engage jet targets moving at airspeeds of up to Mach 2.5. Presumably, this would mean she either had more accurate traverse, more rapid traverse, or both over the Tiger. A secondary battery of 6 3-inch cannons in 3 twin-gun mounts was identical to the Tiger's and was extremely potent for a cannon-based system. For Japan, we have the Battleship Mikasa. The Mikasa was laid down on the 24th of January 1899 in Barrow-in-Furness, launched on the 8th of November 1900, and completed on the 1st of March 1902. Mikasa was assigned to the 1st Division of the 1st Fleet under Admiral Togo by the start of the Russo-Japanese War. She took part in several actions around Port Arthur in 1904. At 13:55, on the 27th of May, 1905, Mikasa, serving still as Admiral Togo's flagship leading the 1st Fleet, raised the Z flag, indicating that action against the Russian fleet near the island of Tsushima was to begin. Several minutes later, Mikasa opened fire on Russian flagship Knyaz Suvorov, along with other ships, and quickly rendered it a total write-off. At the same time, Mikasa had led the fleet across the Russian Tusun. Later, Mikasa and also Fuji laid waste to Borodino. During the battle, Mikasa was hit by more than 40 shells of differing caliber and sent back 124 of her own. Only 6 days after the signing of the Treaty of Portsmouth, she suffered a magazine detonation at Sasebo Harbor that sank the ship and took 251 crewmen with her. She was refloated almost a whole year later, and during the reconstruction to put her back into service, she was armed with the more powerful 12 and 6-inch guns. The Mikasa also participated in the First World War and the intervention in Siberia. In September 1923, Mikasa was decommissioned. demilitarized and immobilized in Yokosuka to serve as a memorial ship. The museum first opened on the 12th of November 1926. During the Second World War, Mikasa was struck by US bombs during various air raids over Japan. With the victory over Japan, the Russians had demanded the ship scrapped until the Russian ambassador visited the ship and found her already effectively destroyed. When Yokosuka was revitalized during the Korean War to serve in the US fleet, some entrepreneurial Japanese businessmen briefly turned her into a recreation hall and also an aquarium. Club Mikasa, or Cafe Togo. After that idea failed, the ship fell into further disrepair until 1958, when she, upon the urging of a former resident of Barrow, the Japanese public and US Fleet Admiral Nimitz funded a restoration campaign to restore her to her original condition. A number of parts came from former South American dreadnoughts, the Almirante La Torre and the Moreno. The museum reopened on the 27th of May 1961 and is still operating today. For the Dutch, we have the HNLMS Evertsen. During the Second World War, the Evertsen was part of the Western Striking Force. From the night of the 26th and the 27th of February, the striking force got the order to attack the Japanese forces that were seen between the island of Java and also Sumatra. But lucky for the striking force, they never managed to get to the Japanese forces. This was lucky because this small striking force would not have had a good time against the Japanese, who with their small fleet just won the Battle of the Java Sea and managed to sink 2 Dutch light cruisers, including the De Ruyter. The Western Striking Force was ordered to move to Ceylon, except for the Evertsen. The Evertsen was ordered to group up with the cruisers, the Houston and the Perth, and help escort them. Due to an unclear reason, the Evertsen was not ready to move out with the cruisers when they were ready to go, and so when the Evertsen moved out, she was already 1 hour late. 4 hours later, the crew saw the lights of bullets and fires in the distance, and so the captain of Evertsen decided to change course and avoid the battle. From this point, the Evertsen got stuck in a dance for its survival, where she ran into Japanese forces, got away again, and then ran into Japanese forces again. But her luck ran out when one of the first salvos of the Japanese destroyer managed to hit her before she could get away. The salvo started a fire on board. The Evertsen again managed to get away, but the fire could not be contained. The captain ran the ship aground on the island, and crew got out of the ship. Shortly after the magazine set on fire, the ship blew up. The crew were then captured by the Japanese not long after, and were taken as prisoners of war. For helicopters, we have the British Boeing H-64E Apache Guardian. This is the latest variation of the famous H-64 TAC helicopter. It incorporates a plethora of upgrades over the previous models and is currently considered to be one of the most advanced helicopters in service worldwide. As of 2020, the British Army has been looking to upgrade its current Augusta Westland Apaches to the H-64E standard. The current WAH-64s are being upgraded by Boeing at a steady pace to unmodified E standard. The first H-64Es were delivered in November of 2020, and as of early 2023, they have 16 out of the 50 ordered upgrades in service. They currently operate very similar armament to the older Apaches, with them using Hellfires, JGMs, and Hydra rockets. The current fleet is set to be fully upgraded by the end of 2024, and is indented to serve for decades to come, expecting to serve well into the 2040s, with the current evaluations for replacement being around 2050. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank GMG Smiley, CD Beans, Chieftain Mike, EMN3 Galaxy, Tulio Pontecorvo, Brendan Quinn, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Ozzy Panzer, Alan Hacker, Liam Shear, Opium Prime, Lafouche, Sem, Aslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.